The morning sun cast long shadows across Oakwood Drive as Angela finished loading her mother's medicine into her car. At 62 years old, her mother Ruth had been struggling with her health lately, and Angela made it a point to visit every few weeks. Today was no different, except for the heavy feeling in her chest as she thought about the difficult conversation. They'd just hit about moving to assisted living. Angela glanced at her watch. It was nearly 11 in the morning. She needed to get back to Washington soon, but these visits with her mother always ran longer than planned. Not that she minded. Family came first, even when you happened to be the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She pulled away from the modest house where she'd grown up, the same house her mother refused to leave despite Angela's concerns about her living alone. The neighborhood had changed over the years. What was once a working-class area had slowly transformed into something more upscale, with young professionals moving in and renovating the older homes. Angela drove slowly through the familiar streets, lost in thought about her mother's stubborn independence. She smiled slightly, remembering how Ruth had raised 3 children on her own after Angela's father passed away. That same strength and determination had shaped Angela into the woman she was today, someone who never backed down from a challenge. Whether it was breaking barriers in law enforcement or standing up for what was right, the radio played softly as she made her way toward the main road. Angela wasn't in any hurry. Her afternoon meetings could wait. This quiet drive through her childhood neighborhood always helped her think clearly about the complex decisions that filled her days at the Bureau. 3 blocks away, Officer Derek Mills sat in his patrol car, finishing his second cup of coffee of the morning. He'd been on the force for 15 years, and lately he'd been feeling like the job wasn't what it used to be. Too many rules, too much paperwork, too many people telling him how to do his job. In his opinion, criminals were getting bolder while cops were being handcuffed by politics. Mills watched the traffic flow by, his eyes scanning each vehicle with practiced suspicion. He'd developed what he called a sixth sense over the years, an ability to spot trouble before it fully revealed itself. His training officer had taught him early on that in police work, assumptions could keep you alive. When he spotted the dark sedan moving slowly through the residential area, something immediately caught his attention. The car was going well below the speed limit, and the driver seemed to be looking around at the houses. Mills had seen this behavior before. Drug dealers scoping out territory, thieves checking for easy targets, or people who simply didn't belong in the neighborhood. He pulled out behind the sedan, maintaining his distance while running the license plate through the system. The car came back clean, registered to someone named A. Washington with an address in Virginia. Mills frowned. Virginia plates in this neighborhood usually meant one thing. Someone who didn't live here was looking for something. Angela noticed the police car in her rear-view mirror but thought nothing of it at first. She continued driving at her normal pace, following the speed limit exactly as she always did. Her training had taught her to be aware of her surroundings, but she was off duty and simply trying to get home. The patrol car stayed behind her for several blocks, making the same turns she made. Angela's stomach tightened slightly. She'd experienced this before, the feeling of being followed, of being watched with suspicion for no reason other than the color of her skin. Even as one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country, she wasn't immune to this reality. Mills decided to make his move. The sedan had now been driving suspiciously for almost 10 minutes, and in his experience, innocent people didn't drive this carefully unless they were hiding something. He hit his lights and pulled the car over near the corner of Maple and 3rd Street. Angela saw the flashing lights and felt her heart rate increase slightly. She pulled over carefully, making sure to stop in a well-lit area where other people could see what was happening. This was a lesson her mother had taught her years ago. Always try to stop where there are witnesses. She turned off the engine and placed her hands on the steering wheel where they would be clearly visible. Angela had given this same advice to countless young people over the years, and now she was following it herself. Stay calm, be respectful, keep your hands where they can see them, and document everything you can remember. Mills approached the car with his hand resting on his service weapon. He'd learned to expect the unexpected, and something about this stop felt different. The driver was sitting too still, too composed. Most people were nervous when they got pulled over, but this woman looked like she was preparing for something. "License and registration," Mills said curtly. Not bothering with pleasantries, Angela reached slowly for her purse, announcing each movement. "I'm reaching for my purse now to get my license and registration." Her voice was calm and professional, the same tone she used in high-level briefings. Mills watched her carefully as she produced the documents. The name on the license matched the registration, Angela Washington. He studied her face, trying to read something in her expression. She was well-dressed, articulate, and driving a nice car, but that didn't mean anything these days. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Mills asked, his tone carrying an edge of suspicion that Angela immediately recognized. "I was visiting my mother," Angela replied simply. "She lives on Birch Street." Mills looked at the address on her license, Virginia. "Long way from home, aren't you? What's your mother's address?" Angela provided the information, maintaining eye contact with the officer. She could see the wheels turning in his head, could almost predict what was coming next. This wasn't her first encounter with racial profiling, though it might be the most ironic. "You were driving pretty slow through here," Mills continued, still not satisfied with her answers. "Almost like you were looking for something." "I was driving the speed limit," Angela said calmly. "I wasn't in any hurry." Mills walked back to his patrol car to run her information through the system. Angela used the time to observe everything. She could, his badge number, the patrol car number, the exact time on her dashboard clock. She also noticed a few neighbors had come out to watch, and at least one person appeared to be recording with their phone. The background check came back clean, just as Angela knew it would. But Mills still wasn't satisfied. There was something about this woman that bothered him, her composure, her way of speaking, the fact that she didn't seem nervous or intimidated. In his experience, innocent people acted differently when they got pulled over. Angela watched in her side mirror as the officer returned to her car. She could tell by his posture and expression that this stop was far from over. She took a deep breath and prepared herself for what she knew was likely coming next. Sometimes being right about people's prejudices was the worst kind of being right. The quiet neighborhood street was about to become the setting for an encounter that would change several lives forever, though neither Angela nor Officer Mills knew it yet. The morning sun continued to shine down on Oakwood Drive, casting the same long shadows as before, but everything was about to change. Mills returned to Angela's car window with a different energy than before. The background check had come back clean, but that only made him more suspicious. In his 15 years on the force, he'd learned that the cleanest records sometimes belong to the smartest criminals. "Step out of the vehicle, please," Mills commanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. Angela felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. "Officer, may I ask why you need me to step out?" "I've provided my license and registration, and I've answered your questions." "Just step out of the car," Mills repeated, his tone growing harder. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone who was supposed to be cooperating with a police investigation. Angela complied slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. She'd trained hundreds of agents on de-escalation techniques, and now she was using every one of them on herself. "Stay calm, don't give them a reason to escalate, and remember that this interaction was likely being recorded by multiple witnesses." As she stood beside her car, Angela noticed more neighbors had gathered. Mrs. Chun from across the street was watching from her porch, and the young couple who lived in the renovated house on the corner had stopped their morning jog to observe. Their presence gave her some comfort, but also highlighted how humiliating the situation was becoming. "I'm going to need to search your vehicle," Mills announced, not asking for permission but stating his intention. "Officer, I haven't committed any crime," Angela said carefully. "What's the probable cause for a search?" Mills' jaw tightened. He hated when people tried to lawyer their way out of situations. "Suspicious behavior in a residential neighborhood, driving below the speed limit, out-of-state plates. That's enough." "Probable cause for me." Angela knew her rights, knew that what he was describing didn't constitute probable cause, but she also knew that arguing wouldn't help her situation. "I do not consent to a search, but I won't physically resist if you proceed." This response surprised Mills. Most people either got angry and confrontational or scared and compliant. This woman was doing neither. She was asserting her rights while remaining cooperative, and something about that bothered him more than outright resistance would have. Mills began searching her car anyway, starting with the obvious places: the glove compartment, under the seats, the center console. Angela watched as he went through her belongings with increasing frustration. Her mother's medication was in a small bag on the passenger seat, along with some documents from their earlier conversation about assisted living facilities. "What's this?" Mills asked, holding up the small pharmacy bag. "Those are my mother's medications," Angela replied. "I picked them up for her this morning." Mills opened the bag and examined the prescription bottles. The names on the labels were clearly printed: Ruth Washington, the same last name as the woman he'd pulled over. But the medications themselves caught his attention: pain medication, anxiety medication, sleep aids. To Mills, it looked like a collection that could easily be sold on the street. "These are some pretty serious medications," he said, turning the bottles over in his hands. "Your mother takes all of these?" "She's elderly and has several health conditions," Angela explained patiently. "Those are all legally prescribed by her doctor." Mills wasn't convinced. He'd seen drug dealers use family members' prescriptions before, either selling them directly or using them as cover for other illegal activities. The bottles looked legitimate, but appearances could be deceiving. "I'm going to need to verify these prescriptions," Mills said, though he had no real way to do that on the spot. What he really wanted was to find something, anything, that would justify his growing suspicion about this woman. Angela watched as the officer continued to examine her mother's medications with an intensity that seemed completely disproportionate to the situation. She could see where this was heading, could feel the familiar weight of being presumed guilty until proven innocent. "Officer, you can call the pharmacy," Angela offered. "The number is right there on the label. They can verify that these medications were picked up legally this morning." But Mills had already made up his mind. Something about this whole situation felt wrong to him. The woman was too calm, too prepared, too articulate. In his experience, innocent people were nervous when they got pulled over. They stumbled over their words. They looked scared. This woman looked like she was mentally taking notes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Mills said, his voice taking on an official tone that signaled the situation was escalating. Angela felt her heart sink. "Officer, what exactly am I being accused?" "OF. Suspicion of drug possession," Mills replied, though even as he said it, he knew the prescription bottles alone wouldn't hold up in court. But sometimes you had to trust your instincts, and his instincts were telling him that this woman was hiding something. The gathering crowd of neighbors became more alert as they watched the interaction intensify. Someone had definitely started recording now. Angela could see the phone screens pointed in her direction. She was grateful for the documentation, even as she felt the sting of humiliation. "These medications are legally prescribed to my mother," Angela said firmly. "I have done nothing wrong." "That's for the court to decide," Mills replied, though he was already starting to feel uncertain about his position. The woman's composure was unnerving. and the way she spoke suggested she knew more about the law than the average person he dealt with. Angela placed her hands on the car as instructed, her mind racing through the implications of what was happening. She thought about her mother, who would worry if she didn't call soon. She thought about her afternoon meetings at the bureau, which she would obviously miss. And she thought about the irony of the situation, the head of the FBI being arrested on suspicion of drug possession. Mills patted her down professionally, finding nothing more suspicious than a cell phone, wallet, and keys. The medication bottles remained the only potential evidence, and even he was beginning to realize how thin that was. "I'm placing you under arrest for suspicion of possession of controlled substances," Mills announced, reaching for his handcuffs. Angela closed her eyes briefly, drawing on decades of training and experience to maintain her composure. When she opened them again, her voice was steady and clear. "Officer, I need you to understand something. You are making a very serious mistake." Mills paused for just a moment. Something in her tone was different, not threatening, not angry, but absolutely certain. It was the voice of someone who knew something he didn't. "Everyone says that," Mills replied, though with less conviction than before. He continued with the arrest process, but Angela's words echoed in his mind. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Angela took one last look at the gathering crowd of neighbors. She saw sympathy in some faces, curiosity in others, and anger in a few. She wondered what they saw when they looked at her: a criminal being rightfully arrested, or an innocent woman being targeted because of her race. The morning sun was higher now, and Oakwood Drive was fully awake. What had started as a routine traffic stop had become something much more significant, though Officer Mills didn't yet realize just how significant it would prove to be. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning air as Mills radioed for backup. Angela stood quietly beside her car, handcuffed and trying to process the surreal nature of her situation. In all her years in law enforcement, she'd never imagined she would be on this side of an arrest. "Unit 47 responding," came the voice over Mills' radio. Angela recognized the professional tone. She'd heard it thousands of times in briefings and operations. The difference was that now she was the subject of the operation. Officer Rodriguez arrived first, stepping out of his patrol car with the practiced alertness of someone responding to a potential drug arrest. Mills waved him over with obvious satisfaction, like a hunter showing off his prize catch. "What do we have here?" Rodriguez asked, looking between Mills and Angela with curiosity. "Suspicious behavior, out-of-state plates, and look at this," Mills said, holding up the pharmacy bag like it was smoking gun evidence. "Multiple controlled substances. Pain meds, anxiety meds, the whole dealer starter pack." Rodriguez examined the prescription bottles, reading the labels carefully. Unlike Mills, he took time to actually look at the details: the patient name, the prescribing doctor, the pharmacy information. Everything appeared legitimate, but he'd learned to trust his partner's instincts over the years. Angela listened to their conversation with growing amazement. She'd seen cases built on less evidence than this, but she'd also seen them fall apart in court when the facts came to light. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd prosecuted cases involving actual drug dealers while now being accused of the same crime based on her mother's legitimate prescriptions. A second patrol car arrived, this one carrying Officer Thompson, a younger cop who was still relatively new to the force. He approached the scene with the enthusiasm of someone eager to be part of what looked like a significant arrest. "Nice work, Mills," Thompson said, clearly impressed. "Drug bust in broad daylight." Mills puffed up slightly at the praise. This was exactly the kind of police work he felt the department needed more of: proactive, aggressive, not waiting for crimes to come to them, but going out and finding the criminals before they could do more damage. "Sometimes you just have to trust your gut," Mills explained to the younger officer. "This one was acting suspicious from the moment I spotted her." Driving too slow, looking around at houses, out-of-state plates in a nice neighborhood. Classic CSING behavior. Angela found herself studying the three officers as they discussed her case. Rodriguez seemed more cautious, asking practical questions about probable cause and evidence. Thompson was clearly learning from what he thought was good police work, and Mills was enjoying his moment as the experienced cop teaching the younger generation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to search you more thoroughly," Mills announced, turning back to Angela. "Standard procedure for drug arrests." "I've already been searched," Angela replied calmly. "You found nothing illegal on my person." "That was a pat down for weapons," Mills clarified. "This is a search for contraband." Angela knew the distinction, knew her rights, and knew that arguing would only make things worse. She also knew that everything happening was being recorded by multiple neighbors, and that this footage would eventually tell the real story of what occurred here today. "I want to make a phone call," Angela said firmly. Mills laughed, a sound that made Angela's jaw tighten slightly. "You think this is a movie? You don't get your phone call until we get to the station." "Actually," Rodriguez interjected quietly, "she does have the right to contact someone, especially if she's not a flight risk." Mills shot his partner a look that suggested this wasn't the time for textbook procedures. "She's under arrest for drug possession. We follow standard protocol." Angela made note of the exchange. Rodriguez seemed to have some doubts about the arrest, while Mills was becoming more entrenched in his position. Thompson was simply absorbing everything, trying to learn what good police work looked like. "I need to use the bathroom," Angela said, testing whether they would show any basic human courtesy. "You can wait until we get to the station," Mills replied curtly. The growing crowd of neighbors was becoming harder to ignore. What had started as a few curious onlookers had grown into a substantial gathering. People were talking among themselves, pointing, and several were definitely recording the interaction on their phones. Mrs. Chen from across the street approached the scene cautiously. She was an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades and had watched it change from working class to more upscale. She'd seen her share of police interactions over the years. "Excuse me, officers," Mrs. Chen said politely. "Is everything all right? This lady was just visiting her mother down the street. I've seen her here many times over the years." Mills turned toward the elderly woman with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, please step back. This is police business." "I'm just saying, she's not a stranger to the neighborhood," Mrs. Chen continued. "Her mother, Ruth, has lived on Birch Street for 30 years. "Ma'am, I need you to step back now," Mills repeated, his voice taking on an edge that made Mrs. Chen retreat to a safer distance. Angela felt a flash of gratitude toward the elderly neighbor. It was a small gesture, but it reminded her that not everyone was quick to assume the worst. Mrs. Chen had recognized her as Ruth's daughter and spoken up, even when it clearly made the officers uncomfortable. Rodriguez was watching the crowd with growing concern. "Mills, maybe we should think about how this looks. We've got a lot of witnesses and the evidence is pretty thin." "The evidence is prescription drugs that she had no legal right to possess," Mills replied stubbornly. "They're prescribed to her mother," Rodriguez pointed out. "And she was coming from her mother's house. How do we know that?" "Because she says so." Mills was getting defensive now, sensing that his partner was questioning his judgment. "Drug dealers lie, Rodriguez. That's what they do." Angela listened to this exchange with fascination. She could see the doubt creeping into Rodriguez's mind, could see Thompson trying to figure out which officer to emulate, and could see Mills becoming more rigid as his position was challenged. "Officers," Angela said quietly, "I understand you're doing your job, but I'm telling you right now that you're making a mistake that's going to have consequences." There was something in her tone that made all three officers pause. It wasn't a threat or a plea, but a simple statement of fact delivered with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how the justice system worked. Everyone in handcuffs says that, Mills replied, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Not like this, Angela said, looking directly at him. Officer Mills, I need you to really think about what you're doing here. Think about the evidence you actually have. Think about the procedures you followed, and think about whether this arrest is really justified. Mills felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the way she said his name, the way she looked at him, suggested that this woman knew more about police procedures than most people should. But he'd come too far to back down now, especially with other officers watching and a crowd of neighbors recording everything. Load her up, Mills told Thompson. We're taking her in. As they walked toward the patrol car, Angela took one last look around the neighborhood where she'd grown up. The morning sun was now high overhead, and Oakwood Drive looked peaceful and normal except for the cluster of police, cars, and gathering crowd. She wondered what her mother would think when she didn't call later as promised. She wondered how long it would take for someone at the bureau to realize their director had been arrested. And she wondered if Officer Mills had any idea that his career was about to change forever. The patrol car door slammed shut with a finality that seemed to echo through the quiet neighborhood. The ride to the police station was silent except for the low chatter of radio, communications, and the hum of the patrol car's engine. Angela sat in the back seat, her hands still cuffed behind her, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by through the window. She'd driven these same streets countless times, but never from this perspective. Thompson was driving while Mills rode shotgun, occasionally turning back to glance at their prisoner. Angela could see him studying her face, perhaps trying to figure out what it was about her that felt different from other arrests he'd made. You ever see someone stay that calm during an arrest? Thompson asked quietly. Mills shifted uncomfortably. The same thing had been bothering him throughout the entire encounter. Most people either got angry and argumentative or scared and cooperative. This woman had remained composed in a way that seemed almost professional. Some people are just good at hiding their guilt, Mills replied. Though his voice lacked conviction, Angela listened to their conversation without commenting. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy was to let people talk themselves into corners. These officers were already having doubts, and anything she said now might just make them dig in harder to justify their actions. The Oakdale Police Department building came into view, a modern structure that had been built just 5 years earlier with federal grants aimed at improving community policing. Angela had actually signed off on some of those grants during her tenure at the Bureau. The irony wasn't lost on her. Inside the station, Sergeant Williams was working the front desk when the 3 officers brought in their arrestee. Williams had been with the department for 22 years and had seen just about everything. He looked up from his paperwork as they approached. What do we have? Williams asked, his experienced eyes taking in the scene. Drug possession, Mills announced. Proudly, caught her with multiple controlled substances in a residential neighborhood. Williams looked at Angela more carefully. There was something about her bearing, the way she held herself even in handcuffs, that caught his attention. Most people brought in on drug charges looked defeated or angry or scared. This woman looked like she was waiting for something. Ma'am, I need to get your information for booking, Williams said professionally. Name? Angela looked directly at him. Angela Washington. Williams wrote it down without thinking much about it. Washington was a common enough name. Address? 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Angela replied clearly. Williams stopped writing and looked up. Excuse me? Actually, let me be more specific, Angela said calmly. Federal Bureau of Investigation Headquarters, J. Edgar Hoover Building, 935 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. The room went completely silent. Thompson looked confused, Rodriguez raised his eyebrows, and Mills felt his stomach drop. Williams set down his pen and stared at the woman in handcuffs. Ma'am, are you saying you work for the FBI? Williams asked. Carefully. I don't work for the FBI, Angela replied, her voice steady and professional. "I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence that followed was deafening. Mills felt the blood drain from his face as the full implications of what she was saying hit him. Thompson looked back and forth between the other officers, trying to understand what was happening. Rodriguez closed his eyes and muttered something. Under his breath, "That's impossible," Mills said weakly. "You're lying." "Officer Mills," Angela said, turning to look at him directly, "I tried to tell you that you were making a mistake. I tried to give you multiple opportunities to reconsider. You chose not to listen." Williams had recovered enough to speak. "Ma'am, do you have any identification to verify this claim?" "My FBI credentials are in my purse, which Officer Mills confiscated during the search of my vehicle," Angela replied. "You'll find my federal identification, my badge, and several other items that should make my identity very clear." Mills fumbled for the evidence bag containing Angela's personal items. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened it and began going through the contents. When he pulled out the black leather credential case, his worst fears were confirmed. He opened it slowly, as if hoping it might contain something different than what he expected. But there it was, the official FBI badge and identification card of Angela Washington, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The photograph matched the woman standing in front of them. The credentials looked authentic. And suddenly, everything about her behavior during the arrest made perfect sense. "Oh my God," Thompson whispered, finally understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. Williams reached for his phone immediately. "I need to call Chief Davidson right now." "Sir, you might want to call the mayor too," Rodriguez suggested quietly. "And probably someone at the FBI to verify this." Mills was staring at the credentials as if they might disappear if he looked. Hard enough. This couldn't be happening. He'd arrested drug dealers before. He knew what they looked like, how they acted. This woman had been too calm, too prepared, too articulate. Now he understood why. "Director Washington," Williams said, his tone completely changed, "I am deeply sorry about this situation. We're going to get this straightened out immediately." "Sergeant Williams," Angela replied, "I appreciate your professionalism, but I need you to understand that this isn't just going to disappear. What happened today was a violation of my civil rights, and it's part of a pattern of behavior that needs to be addressed." The phone on Williams' desk rang before he could respond. Chief Davidson was already on his way in, having been alerted by the department's monitoring system that showed an arrest had been made. He had no idea what he was walking into. Mills stood frozen, still holding the FBI credentials. Everything was crashing down around him, his career, his reputation, possibly his freedom. He'd made arrests based on less evidence before, but never against someone who actually had the power to destroy him. Can we just let this go?" Mills asked desperately. "I mean, no real harm was done, right?" Angela turned to look at him with an expression that was both sad and resolute. "Officer Mills, you handcuffed the director of the FBI on a public street, based on her mother's prescription medications. You denied me my rights, ignored evidence that contradicted your assumptions, and treated me like a criminal because of the color of my skin and your own prejudices." The truth of her words hung in the air like a weight. Everyone in the room knew she was right, knew that this incident was going to have far-reaching consequences. "The question now," Angela continued, "is whether this department is going to take responsibility for what happened and work to prevent it from happening again, or whether you're going to try to cover it up and make things worse." Williams was frantically trying to reach Chief Davidson, while simultaneously trying to figure out the proper protocol for this unprecedented situation. Rodriguez was reviewing everything that had happened, already thinking about the reports he'd have to write. Thompson was questioning everything he thought he knew about police work, and Mills was standing there holding the credentials of one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country, realizing that his 15-year career was probably over. The morning that had started as a routine patrol shift had become a career-ending catastrophe. And it was all because he'd refused to listen when Angela Washington tried to tell him he was making a mistake. Chief Davidson burst through the police station doors like a man running from a fire. He'd received 3 phone calls during his drive-in, one from Sergeant Williams, one from the mayor's office, and one from someone claiming to be from FBI headquarters asking about Director Washington's whereabouts. The scene in the booking area looked like a freeze frame from a nightmare. Officer Mills stood holding FBI credentials with trembling hands. Angela Washington remained handcuffed despite her revealed identity, and the other officers looked like they were waiting for the building to collapse around them. "Get those handcuffs off her right now," Davidson ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew his department was about to face a crisis unlike anything in its history. Thompson fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked Angela's restraints. She rubbed her wrists calmly, showing no anger despite everything she'd endured over the past 2 hours. "Director Washington," Davidson said, his voice a mixture of respect and panic, "I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about this situation. This is not representative of our department's values or training." Angela studied the chief's face carefully. She'd dealt with law enforcement administrators for decades and could usually tell the difference between genuine remorse and damage control. Davidson seemed genuinely horrified by what had happened. "Chief Davidson," Angela replied, "I appreciate your words, but we both know this isn't just about one officer's poor judgment. This is about systemic issues that allowed this situation to occur in the first place." Meanwhile, Angela's phone had been buzzing constantly with missed calls. Her assistant director had been trying to reach her for the past hour, and when she didn't answer, he'd started making calls to local law enforcement agencies. The FBI's protective detail was already en route to Oakdale. Davidson's own phone rang. Again, this time it was the Attorney General's office. Word was spreading quickly through law enforcement channels that something significant had happened involving the FBI. "Director, sir, we have news crew setting up outside," Rodriguez reported, looking out the front windows. "And there are federal vehicles pulling into the parking lot." Angela wasn't surprised. In today's world of social media and instant communication, the cell phone videos from the arrest scene had probably already gone viral. Mrs. Chun and the other neighbors had captured everything, and those videos were likely spreading across the internet faster than anyone could contain them. Mills finally found his voice. "Director Washington, I made a mistake. I was just trying to do my job." Angela turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Officer Mills, you didn't make a mistake. You made a series of deliberate choices based on your assumptions about who I was and what I was doing. Those choices revealed something about how you approach your job and how you see people who look like me." The truth of her words hit Mills like a physical blow. She was right. Every decision he'd made had been intentional, from the initial traffic stop to the final arrest. He'd seen a black woman in a nice neighborhood and assumed she didn't belong there. "What happens now?" Thompson asked quietly. As the youngest officer present, he was trying to understand how this incident would affect his own career and future in law enforcement. "Now we deal with the consequences," Angela replied. "And hopefully, we use this as an opportunity to examine why these things continue to happen and what we can do to prevent them in the future." Chief Davidson was already thinking about damage control, but he was smart enough to know that trying to minimize this incident would only make things worse. The FBI director had been arrested by his officers, and there was no spinning that into anything positive. Angela's assistant director, Robert Chun, arrived with a small team of federal agents. His face was grim as he assessed the situation. Behind him came Angela's personal security detail, who had been frantically searching for her when she missed her scheduled check-in. "Director, are you all right?" Chun asked, his concern evident. "I'm fine, Robert," Angela replied. "Though I think we have some important work to do." The media presence outside was growing by the minute. Local news had arrived first, followed quickly by national outlets who had picked up the story from social media. The footage of Angela being handcuffed and searched was already being broadcast across the country. Angela made a decision that would define how this story was handled. Instead of leaving through a back entrance or letting others speak for her, she chose to face the situation directly. "Chief Davidson, I'm going to hold a press conference outside," she announced. "This story is already out there, and it's better if people hear the facts directly from me." Davidson nodded, though he looked like he might be sick. He knew that whatever Angela said to the media would determine his department's fate and possibly his own career. Angela walked outside to face a crowd of reporters, cameras, and community members who had gathered after hearing about the incident. She stood behind a makeshift podium that someone had set up, looking composed despite everything she'd been through. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "My name is Angela Washington, and I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This morning, I was arrested by officers from the Oakdale Police Department while visiting my mother in the neighborhood where I grew up." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. "I want to be clear about what happened," Angela continued. "I was pulled over for allegedly driving suspiciously through a residential neighborhood. Despite providing proper identification and answering all questions truthfully, I was searched, handcuffed, and arrested based solely on my mother's legally prescribed medications that I had picked up for her." She paused, letting the facts sink in before continuing. "This incident is not just about me. It's about the thousands of people who experience this kind of treatment every day but don't have the platform or power to bring attention to it. It's about the assumptions that are made about people based on their appearance and the consequences of those assumptions." Mills watched the press conference from inside the station, knowing that his actions were being described to a national audience. Every choice he'd made that morning was being examined and found wanting. "However," Angela continued, "I also want to acknowledge that Chief Davidson and his staff have been professional and cooperative since my identity was confirmed. We have an opportunity here to turn this negative incident into something positive." She announced that the FBI would be conducting a comprehensive review of the Oakdale Police Department's practices, with a focus on bias training and community relations. She also revealed that she would be working with the department to develop new protocols for preventing similar incidents. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Angela concluded, "but it starts with acknowledgement of problems and a commitment to do better. Today was difficult for everyone involved, but if we use this experience to improve how law enforcement serves all members of our community, then something good will have come from it." As she finished speaking and walked back toward the federal vehicles, Angela felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The morning had been humiliating and frustrating, but it had also provided an opportunity to address issues that affected far more people than just herself. Officer Mills turned in his badge that afternoon, knowing his career in law enforcement was over. Rodriguez and Thompson enrolled in additional bias training and became advocates for reform within their department. Chief Davidson implemented sweeping changes to prevent similar incidents, and Angela Washington continued her work as FBI director, carrying with her a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by ordinary citizens who encounter prejudice in their daily lives. The incident on Oakwood Drive became a catalyst for meaningful change, proving that sometimes the most important battles are fought not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but on quiet neighborhood streets where justice and injustice meet.